Week 1, Overview. Dawn of the 20th century. The 20th century starts off with a bang. Most everything that we'll look at this week, from cars to planes to weapons to the American presidency, will just get bigger and faster and more powerful from here to the end of the year. Buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild ride. As we noted in the unit introduction, this new century was breathtakingly good in some ways, but in other ways the 20th century was horribly bad. Between wars, revolutions, purges, plagues, disasters, and abortion on demand, it's been estimated that in the 20th century alone there were at least 1,380,000,000 inflicted deaths. That's more than 80% of the total human population at the start of the century. These frightful statistics are enough to make a caring parent ask, do my children really need to learn about this evil? Tapestry of Grace attempts to lead children through the harsh realities of history in age-appropriate ways. Little children can learn about Hitler without having nightmares about him. But young adults need to know what horrors humans are capable of to fulfill God's purposes in their generation. We study the past to keep from repeating its mistakes. The best reason for Christians to study history is to see the hand of God at work. Even when times are evil or perplexing, God is still there and still very much in control. We'll see that in a big way this year. The 20th century reveals the depths of human sin and the heights of divine mercy. God's wisdom, mercy, justice, kindness, and grace towards ill-deserving people are on full display all year. There's a theological term for God's kindness to people in general. It's called common grace, and the 20th century is full of it. One aspect of common grace is technology, which was advancing rapidly in the new century. Grammar-level children are learning about two big developments, Orville and Wilbur Wright's airplane and Henry Ford's automobile. Physics was being transformed at a fundamental level in the first few years of the 20th century. Max Planck's research and experiments led him to originate the quantum theory. Planck's work laid the groundwork for one of Albert Einstein's three big breakthroughs in 1905. Einstein got a Nobel Prize for showing that light could be treated as packets of energy, which we now call photons. Einstein also published a paper about relativity that year. Relativity and quantum theory would mushroom into a whole new kind of physics by the middle of the century. Not every technological change made life better. Europe had been largely at peace since the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. By the turn of the century, many young men in England, France, and Germany longed for triumphs on the battlefield. What they didn't realize was what military technology had advanced through all those years of peace, from muskets to rifles to machine guns to mustard gas. Europe had avoided war for so long that young men romanticized its glories while ignoring its horrors. Some young Englishmen did get a taste of war in faraway South Africa. In 1881, the Dutch settlers in South Africa, who are also known as the Boers or Afrikaners, fought their British colonial rulers. They achieved partial independence with the creation of an independent South African Republic. That lasted until gold was found in South Africa, when the Afrikaners began to deny political rights to any non-Boers in their territory in an effort to protect their rights to the gold. Most of the non-Boers were British citizens, however, so Britain invaded South Africa, expecting to overtake the Boers in a very short time. Conquering the Boers proved harder than it looked, however. The Second Boer War lasted almost 3 years, with high casualties on both sides. The Boers were finally defeated after the British engaged in total warfare, starving the Afrikaners into submission. They finally accepted Edward VII as their king and were allowed to keep their property and didn't have to pay any war indemnities. The Boers and the British worked out their differences, but the original black inhabitants of South Africa weren't so lucky. South Africa created a system of official racial segregation called apartheid, from the Afrikaner word for separation or apartness. We'll come back to South Africa later in year 4. It was one of the world's last strongholds of overt official racism. Around the same time, violence broke out in China. Several of the world's most powerful nations met in 1899 to discuss trade with China, but the Chinese weren't in on the discussion. America and the great European powers all endorsed what became known as the open door policy, which would force China to let them trade there. The Chinese government was anything but happy about this proposal. In fact, a strong anti-foreigner sentiment in China gave rise to the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. During this rebellion, secret societies called the Yihequang, known as Boxers by the Westerners because their Chinese name meant righteous harmony of fists, killed many foreigners residing in the country, plus many Chinese Christians. Troops from Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, and the United States went to China to put down the Boxer Rebellion. When the Chinese surrendered, they were forced to pay a large sum of money and to agree to the stationing of U.S. and other foreign troops throughout China. As a result of this event, the Manchu, or Qing dynasty, tottered on the brink of destruction. China's ancient civilization was badly weakened, leaving it open to attack. We'll see the consequences of that weakness in Unit 2. America had its own little war in 1898 when the United States fought Spain. If your dialectic level children used Tapestry of Grace last year, they should have learned about Teddy Roosevelt, the rough-riding hero of San Juan Hill. Let's see how much they remembered after the break, or how much they've learned if your family's just starting Tapestry now, by reviewing Teddy's youth. From his early childhood, Teddy Roosevelt was frail and weak, often struggling to breathe. Roosevelt's father told him man was not intended to be an oyster and urged him to exercise, to make his body strong. He did, and though ill health plagued him throughout his life, he became the very model of a vigorous man. He wasn't just sick as a child, he was fearful. But young Roosevelt read a book that explained, if you act like you're not afraid, then you will not be afraid. He took it to heart, and his life thereafter exemplified courage. Roosevelt saw war as the ultimate test of courage, manhood, patriotism, and strength, so from his youth he made up his mind that if war ever came, he would serve as a soldier. Although Roosevelt's home was in New York State, he came to love the openness and the vastness of the West. He enjoyed outdoor adventures, such as hunting and cattle driving. Roosevelt was passionate about everything he did. When he first got involved in politics, he disliked simply talking about a problem. He was always itching to do something about it. This is why some gave him the nickname the Young Reformer. At age 24, Roosevelt became the youngest member of the New York State Assembly, where he served till 1884. In 1895, he became the U.S. Civil Service Commissioner. In this position, he worked hard to stop corruption in the government. Roosevelt continued his reform efforts in New York City when he became the police commissioner there in 1895. In 1897, President McKinley appointed Roosevelt to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He served in this post until he resigned it in order to lead the voluntary cavalry regiment, called the Rough Riders, in the Spanish-American War. Roosevelt's Rough Riders helped win the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba, and the subsequent sensational media coverage made him a national hero. When he came back from Cuba in 1898, Roosevelt served as governor of New York. President McKinley asked him to be his vice president in his bid for re-election in 1900, which Roosevelt initially saw as a do-nothing job. He took it very reluctantly. That changed, though. McKinley was assassinated just a few months after taking office. Roosevelt became the youngest man to become president at the age of 42. In his first term as president, Roosevelt became known as a trust buster. He fought against the power of big businesses, including those in the railroad and oil industries. In 1902, Roosevelt instructed his Attorney General to sue J.P. Morgan's Northern Securities Company, which had been created to eliminate the competition between rival railroads by creating a monopoly. Morgan's monopoly violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, but federal government had not really dared to use it against the truly big businesses before this time. After 2 years, the Supreme Court decided that Morgan had acted illegally and ordered the Northern Securities Company to be dissolved. That was just the first of many big corporations Roosevelt took on. Roosevelt's foreign policy is easy to remember. He's the one who said America should speak softly and carry a big stick. The soft words represented diplomacy. The big stick was a strong American military. In 1902, Roosevelt began talking to Colombian officials about building a canal across Panama. Colombia refused, but shortly after a revolution erupted in Colombia. With American support, Panama declared itself an independent republic. Within 2 weeks, the United States and the new Republic of Panama signed a treaty granting the United States permission to build a canal. Roosevelt was nicknamed the Great Conservationist because he believed in preserving unspoiled land and wildlife for future generations. He added around 150 million acres to the national forests and set up 5 national parks, plus 25 irrigation or reclamation projects, 18 national monuments, 51 federal bird reserves, and 4 national game preserves. No wonder this larger-than-life figure wound up with his face on one of America's most famous national landmarks, Mount Rushmore. Teddy Roosevelt was a remarkable man by any human standard. He learned to rely on his own grit and effort in his boyhood, and he accomplished amazing things. Christians can appreciate his energy, enthusiasm, and his demonstrated gift of leadership, and yet still wonder, how much more might he have done if he had relied on God instead of Teddy.